While the President of the United States attended a summit that's got everyone pondering the future of the NATO alliance, back in Washington, the next phase of the impeachment inquiry has some wondering about the future of Western democracy. The House of Representatives Judiciary Committee convening to draw up articles of impeachment based on testimony and evidence that the U.S. President pressured his newly elected Ukrainian counterpart to dig up dirt on Donald Trump's potential re-election rival, Joe Biden. Does the evidence matter? Do citizens ultimately care enough? Donald Trump's favorability ratings are negative, but much better than, say, Richard Nixon's during Watergate. Why is that? We'll ask about the latest evidence, including released phone records that link Devin Nunes, the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, to a Ukrainian-born middleman who's now under arrest. Do those conversations matter? If ultimately Donald Trump is cleared and wins a second term, it will be thanks to a strategy that no longer consists in finding the middle ground and appealing to the majority, but energizing enough loyal followers to turn out in greater numbers on the day. In the age of social media and the micro-targeting of voters, what lessons will politicians draw on this side of the Atlantic? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the battle over impeachment. Joining us is Mark Porter, president of Republicans Overseas. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, François.
And we want to welcome back as well former U.S. diplomat Jeffrey Hawkins.
Howdy.
Nice to see you. Nice to see as well Anne Desine, professor emeritus at Nanterre University. Your latest book in French, The United States and Democracy.
Mm-hmm. Sort of topical.
It is sort of topical, indeed. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, from the House Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary and beyond, the Democrats hoping for a Christmas impeachment and a trial before the Senate completed in time for those first presidential primaries in January.
The facts before us are undisputed. On July 25th, President Trump called President Zelensky of Ukraine and in President Trump's words, asked him for a favor. That call was part of a concerted effort by the president and his men to solicit a personal advantage in the next election.
This is not an impeachment. This is just a simple railroad job. And today's is a waste of time because this is where we're at. So I close today with this. It didn't start with Mueller. It didn't start with a phone call. You know where this started? It started with tears in Brooklyn in November 2016 when an election was lost.
All right, those are the opening remarks we heard at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Before we delve into the evidence at hand, and let's begin just by explaining to viewers the procedure here, just so that it's clear, because people don't necessarily know all the intricacies of the U.S. Constitution. So there are two charges: abuse of power and obstruction of justice. They're going to be what's so-called articles of impeachment. What happens after? Talk us through it.
Well, first, it's interesting. We are finally at the Judiciary Committee. What happened before, usually it doesn't happen in a normal impeachment. But since it had to do with putting pressure on a foreign government, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House, decided it was a good idea to have the Intelligence Committee with its chairman, Adam Schiff, to be in charge. So, as to the charges, what happened this afternoon is that the Judiciary Committee had asked 4 professors of law to answer the questions of the 2 crimes that were discussed in the 300-page report submitted by the Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee. 3 of them were chosen by Democrats, and I was able to hear some of that. For them, it's very clear that there is an abuse of power and there is obstruction to Congress. And I heard a passage by Pamela Karlan, I'm sure she's a good friend of the Republicans, in which she said, if this is not punishable, if the fact that President Trump told everybody, Mike Pompeo, State Department, Mulvaney, the budget, you don't go. If it's okay for a president to refuse, even when there is a subpoena, to give any documents, her conclusion was that there is no impeachment power for the House because the way for the House to decide whether there is an impeachment or not is to be able to investigate. And the Congress cannot investigate if the White House stonewalls and refuses to give anything.
And before we go into the details of that and into the just to be clear again for our viewers, because people often confuse, they think impeachment, the word impeachment means removal from office, but it doesn't. There's going to be...
It means two things. That's the problem.
It means indictment, right?
That's right. The first step is indictment by the House, and then the House plays the role of a prosecutor in front of the Senate, and the senators are both judges and jurors, and they decide if the president is guilty or not, but they need a 2/3 majority.
All right, and the House controlled by the Democrats, the Senate controlled by the Republicans.
It's not exactly accurate what Ann said in terms of impeachment going through the Intelligence Committee first. Nancy Pelosi made a political calculation that there weren't enough Americans that actually supported impeachment, and she felt like there needed to be hearings on television in order to drive up the poll ratings for impeachment so that this could move forward with more political
But the
cover.
president
The
had
president
wanted... Yes.
demanded that they would say, oh, this is being
That's
done in
right.
secret.
That's
we
right.
need public hearings, and then they were given public
That's
hearings.
right. And then they say it's not a good idea.
Exactly right. And guess what happened? President Trump was correct, and the poll ratings have gone down for impeachment. So, in fact, impeachment in the House is a political process, not a legal one. It doesn't become a legal process until it moves to the Senate, as you rightfully pointed out.
No, it is a political
However,
process.
it is a political process. We're seeing from the Republican side, this has been great news for us. The poll numbers are up in swing states. The amount of contributions and donations are up from small donors who say it's unfair to the president. We are in a position where...
And just to be clear, those small donors, they're not independent voters. They're energized Republicans.
No,
right?
they're independent voters.
Really?
Actually, we don't know who the donors are because we don't collect that kind of information. But the idea is from swing states, we're getting a massive amount of small donor support. That should not happen during an impeachment trial. Bill Clinton was impeached, and his poll numbers went down. The majority of Americans were for impeachment during this particular time. And also what's interesting is that President Trump's approval ratings
Were they really?
are higher. Absolutely. President Trump's approval ratings now are higher than Barack Obama's at this time of the cycle back in his term in 2012.
A little bit of counter data on this. I mean, going back to 2018, which is before the impeachment process, the Republican Party suffered a fairly historic defeat in the House.
It wasn't historic. It was normal.
So already the electoral evidence, if we can call it that, for this was all during the Mueller investigation. All the rest was there. Recently, we've had a couple of more electoral processes. In particular, both the House and the Senate in Virginia went to the Democrats. The Republicans lost in Kentucky. Admittedly, the Republicans had a problematic candidate, and they lost in Louisiana. And in both states, Trump was there urging voters.
But it's not a presidential election year.
No, but Trump made a personal plea to the voters of those two states, saying, "Vote for these people for me," and that wasn't how the electorate turned. So to say that there's some sort of broad support for the president because he's been impeached isn't held up by the recent electoral work.
Absolutely it is, because in fact we will see the reason in 2018 that we had losses, certainly not historic like Obama had, but the losses that we had in 2018 were because Trump was not on the ticket and we didn't do a good job getting voters out there. Democrats did a great job in 2018. They had a great ground game. They really were winning, but now they're not. When Trump is on the ticket, we win. When he's not on the ticket, we lose.
How about these recent elections where he was...
These are one-off elections.
Polling for them personally and going in and doing...
Nancy Pelosi was very well aware of the danger because we saw what happened last year with the Kavanaugh hearings. The Kavanaugh hearings were a scandal because somebody that should never have been confirmed to the Supreme Court is now a justice on the Supreme Court.
That's not true, and you know it, Ann. That's unfair.
Yes, I know it.
And not only that, he was supported by Democrats before.
No, he was supported by two
today,
Democrats who wanted to save their seat. Whether it's a good idea or not, we're not going to discuss. So we know what happens when something goes wrong and the Republicans want to protect the president. So because of the Kavanaugh hearing, the Republicans were galvanized. And that's explained why the Republicans were able to keep
No,
the
you're forgetting the
majority in the
independents.
Senate.
All right, but
So
hold on.
Nancy
Let's-
Pelosi was aware that this was a danger to pursue impeachment.
That's why
she
she said
dragged
she
her
wasn't going
feet.
to do it. She
That's right.
promised not to do it unless it was bipartisan for it.
No,
It
no,
was
unless
bipartisan
there was
against
something
impeachment.
that's so serious that she could not avoid going
Oh,
on the
that's
impeachment
not
route.
true, Ann.
And the
You know
fact
that.
the fact that you exchange, you put pressure, you hold military aid that's so necessary for your personal profit. I mean,
That's
what else
absolutely
is a
not true,
definition
Ann.
of
You know
abuse
better
of
than to
No,
talk
I am a
about
law
these things.
professor, so I share exactly what the law professor on the panel said. I mean, those are clear violations
The
of the
law
Constitution.
professor on the panel were Clinton donors. These people are against Trump,
There
so
is-
this is cherry picking for the commissions.
No,
You
one
know
of them
that.
was
It is
chosen
a
by the
fact
Republicans.
It is a fact that the White House withheld aid that had been approved by Congress to a U.S. ally, which is at war
Wait.
essentially with
Francois,
with
this is not the
pro-Russian
whole
militia.
picture. Let me explain something. The budget process is difficult. I know. I work on getting foreign aid for a lot of countries. How, and you know this, how this is allocated through the budget process, through the appropriations process, and that getting things held up all the time by many different people. The president did not hold up the funds. Now, the other thing is that President Trump has given more aid to Ukraine than any other president has, including the Javelin rockets that were sent there. So there is absolutely no way that anybody could say that President Trump had put Ukraine in
Yes,
danger.
there is.
That's-
Because the
that is
Pentagon had
false.
said yes. The
That is
Pentagon has
false.
said no hold on the
Absolutely
aid.
not.
It is essential.
That's not true, Ann. You know
Yes,
that.
it is.
Let's talk about the general mood going into this phase two, if you will, of the impeachment process, and along with handing that case to the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives, the Intelligence Committee handed over evidence, and there was one surprise: these phone records. One of Rudy Giuliani's middlemen, Rudolph Giuliani, the personal lawyer for Donald Trump, his middleman on Ukraine, Ukrainian-born businessman Lev Parnas, spoke with the House-ranking Republican Devin Nunes for 8 minutes and 34 seconds on April the 12th of this year. He hung up the phone, Parnas, and then spoke with conservative columnist John Solomon, whose columns led the charge against Joe Biden and sacked U.S. Ambassador Mary Yovanovitch. On Tuesday, the California congressman had trouble remembering the phone call, just as Fox News' Sean Hannity had trouble remembering Lev Parnas' first name.
Did you ever
Right,
talk
so-
to this guy, Les Parnas, or whoever his name is?
You know, it's possible, but I haven't gone through all my phone records. I don't really recall that name. You know, I remember the name now because he's been indicted. But why would CNN rely on somebody like this? You know, and I'll go back and check all my records, but it seems very unlikely that I would be taking calls from random people.
Yeah, but here's the question now, Mark Porter, Sean Hannity. He you can like or dislike his views, but he's a thorough professional. Of course, he knows Lev Parnas' first name. He pretends he's never heard of the guy.
Not necessarily. You don't know that. You can't jump to that sort of conclusion. And the thing is, there are so many names being thrown out here. The idea, do you know how many phone calls I take a day? I don't know
With
all these people that
criminals?
call me up all the time.
With criminals? No,
How
you would
do you
remember.
know?
You would remember if they were criminals. They were
How do you
all over
know
the
he's a
paper 2
criminal?
weeks
Man,
ago.
you're
Even
just-
in France, we know who Parnas is because they were all over the media for 2 weeks. I mean, they're friends of Giuliani, and they end up being
What-
indicted. Who would forget that?
Now, these phone call records, will they matter in the end?
It depends on whether you're sitting on this side of the table or that side of the table. And we are in a situation now where our realities are completely separate. And with all respect to our colleague from the Republican Party, I just don't share his views at all. Perhaps you don't either. And it's not over matters of opinion. It's a matters of interpretation of fact.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
And this is a very strange place that we've come to in America right now. And so for people like me who believe that the president did something completely inappropriate
With no evidence.
and impeachable, and I've had unimpeachable witnesses, including people that I know personally, get up on the stand and testify to it. For me, there's no question about it. And of course, the calls make a difference. And of course, someone like Representative Nunes, who has a rather checkered reputation in all this to begin with.
He does not.
For someone like me, that is absolutely convincing, and there is not a single doubt in my mind. For someone like Mr. Porter, there's no problem at all. What are we even talking about? And that's the America we live in that's split right down
Why
the middle.
why is it like that? Why is America like that?
I would say there's lots of reasons for it. Some are long term, the nature of media and the 24-hour news cycle and the internet and Fox News and the politicization of media.
CNN,
There's
and
that.
MSNBC.
There's Fox News on one side, there's MSNBC on the other.
There's economic issues and all the rest that have led to a certain polarization of the electorate, issues of race and issues of immigration that have been so divisive in our country. But in the short term, it's like that because Donald Trump made it that way.
Oh, please. That is
and he
absolutely
did that
ridiculous.
because it was in his political interest.
That
and
is not
sir, you can say
true.
whatever you want about Ukraine or whatever else. I think we can all agree that Donald Trump has certainly broken some norms in his 3 years in office. And so the norms of it's the alternate facts that Kellyanne Conway spoke about right at the beginning of the administration, where the norms, the interpretations, let's not even speak about the civility and all the rest. It's all gone, and so there's two Americas. There's red America and there's blue America, and there is no space in between, and that is what this impeachment hinges on. So spoiler alert here. We're going to get an impeachment in a few weeks or in a month or two, and we're not going to get a conviction in the Senate, and that's what's going to happen. And then the people of the United States will decide, in principle, if the Russians don't interfere in the elections, will decide in 2020,
Come on,
and
let's be serious.
and then we'll see
First
which
of
of
all,
the two
we already
truths
heard this
hold.
story. With all respect to my colleague here, we've heard this with Mueller. We heard this with Kavanaugh, and it all turned out to be fake. I mean, that's why we
there
call
was
it
no
fake news.
investigation.
The idea is we're going to have real investigations when he gets to the Senate. I talked with Senator Graham a couple of days ago. He's happy. And Senator Graham was in the middle until Kavanaugh. And people like you were sitting up there telling us that we had no choice and Kavanaugh's an awful person. And that's just bad, Ann. You know better than that. And the idea that Senator Graham and other Republican senators who were in the middle, who had been bipartisan, that worked with Obama and the Democrats, were stabbed in the back by Democrats this time. That broke it. So don't you dare blame President Trump when you people over there, and you know you're Democrats.
This is
precisely
what I'm speaking about.
Exactly what I'm talking about. They insult us night and day and expect us just to remain quiet.
And
we have to tell the truth.
I'd like to say
now,
that
idea
word
is
fake,
the truth is important.
The fake
we
word,
can't
the
just,
fake news thing.
Yes.
All right.
That's a Trump trademark.
Exactly.
Who
And
cares?
that
It's
is
true.
We're gonna
completely
take-
representative
is
of-
still important, sir.
That's not what
And
that's
Senator
what I'm
Graham is
saying.
trying to save his seat because he's afraid of the primary
We're gonna take-
election.
That's
we're
That's
gonna
one
take-
reason for his
That
change
is
of mind.
absolutely not true.
We're going to
Yes,
take
it
a
is.
quick break. We'll have it all sorted when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're entering into phase two, if you will, of impeachment hearings against Donald Trump, with the Democrats hoping that impeachment can be wrapped up by Christmas for then a trial by the Senate. We're talking about it with Mark Porter, president of Republicans Overseas. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to former U.S. diplomat Jeffrey Hawkins, and Desine, Professor Emeritus at Paris-Nanterre University, and the author in French of The United States and Democracy. And Paris Traffic could not keep away Dick Howard, political theorist, the author of Shadows of America, From Kennedy to Trump. Thanks for making it.
It was a nice walk. It's miserable to be sitting in a taxi in the middle of a traffic jam. What can I tell you?
Let's talk about the mood, not here in Paris, where there's strikes planned for Thursday, but over in the U.S. right now. And perhaps to begin, roll back the clock a quarter of a century. It was, by the way, this time of year when Bill Clinton's impeachment happened. Impeachment proceedings began in October of 1998. And then there was this January trial by the Senate. Now, at the time, at least 5 Republicans crossed the aisle to vote against impeachment, against the deposing the president on both counts. This was pertaining to the Monica Lewinsky affair. Dick Howard, at the time, U.S. politics, everybody was complaining, but they were using the words gridlock and how dysfunctional it was. It seems like a golden age when you look at today, just how polarized both sides are. Why is it like that today?
Why is it like that today? Why don't we go back even further, if you like, and we go back to the themes that I tried to broach when I titled my book From Kennedy to Trump. I think it begins around then. It begins with a radicalization, first of the left, including the Black Power movement, and then gradually it fades away, loses its sense and sensibility, and you get a movement coming from the other side. And you have a balance in American politics over a longer time. What I don't think has happened is that the institutions have not kept up with the situations.
So you have natural pendulum swings in politics, right? From left to right, right to left. But this kind of polarization, you're saying that's not new?
I'm saying that's not new. What I'm saying, though, more importantly, I think what's at issue here is not simply the question of impeachment. I think what's at issue here is a much more fundamental constitutional breakdown that could be getting worse as time goes on. Already at the night of Trump's election, I asked the question, I was on French television, French radio, I asked the question, what would happen if Trump did not win? What would the Trump supporters do? You had that radicalization just as you had in previous times, radicalization on the left, going back to the time of the Vietnam War, to the time of civil rights movement and so on. And the American institutional structure, it seems to me, is set up so that you have a situation of checks, but also of balances. And what we need to see is whether there's going to be a movement of this balancing taking place, or whether, and here's, if you will, my kicker for this whole thing. Don't forget, there's not only the Trump impeachment matter, there's also, before June 30th, it seems to me, we're going to have a serious constitutional problem in this country in one of two ways. Either, in both cases, in two cases coming before the Supreme Court, there's a demand that's gone through the courts of appeals, it's going to the Supreme Court, for Trump to publish his income tax documents. At that point, Trump will appeal. It's going to go to the court. In the two previous impeachment affairs, Nixon and Clinton, in both cases, the president asked the court to intervene in his favor, instead of which the court, 9-0, ruled that the president was not a king, was not a ruler. Exactly. And there is a third case, which is the year 2000 election. And you remember what happened there? The Supreme Court ruled 5-4. What's going to happen now when this case comes before the court? Is it going to be the case that Chief Justice Roberts is going to be an institutionalist and is going to vote with the left or Democrats or whatever? Or will you get a tendency like the year 2000? And then all bets are off, it seems to me.
All bets will be off if they agree not to allow the release of those tax returns, is what you're saying.
Yes, it's a destruction of the system. The base is checks and balances, and so far the courts have played their role of defender of the Constitution. There's been so much erosion of norms, written norms, the Constitution, and unwritten norms, that at some point there needs to stop. And I agree. I mean, those cases are so very important. In U.S. versus Nixon, the court in 1974, the court said there is executive privilege, but it is not absolute. On the other side, there is the interest of a criminal trial. Therefore, the president cannot protect the recordings in the White House. He must give the recordings, and that was the beginning of the end. Will the Supreme Court, with 5 strong conservatives, ask President Trump to release his tax returns? This is not sure.
And will he?
Yeah, that's something else I wanted to add. I remember discussing after the 2000 election the decision by the Supreme Court. And Justice Breyer was not happy with the decision, but he said there's one good thing about America. We accepted the decisions. We, the minority on the court, but the American people. What we may fear today is that if Donald Trump were to lose the election, we don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be a majority of his voters to accept the result of the election? And I'm not sure about that.
And Democrats, will they accept a re-election by Donald Trump?
There's another really interesting element to this that is just starting to get some play in the United States, and that is there will be probably constitutional issues decided during the Senate trial itself, because Chief Justice Roberts is presiding, and rather than go through the Supreme Court, for the length of time that takes, and unclear decision-making
because Democrats want to be expeditious so it doesn't run into primary season.
They can, during the trial, appeal to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court directly in his role as presiding officer of that trial and get decisions on matters of constitutional matters, like can the president and his administration be compelled to testify.
And Republicans can do the same. In fact, that's our strategy right now. The biggest problem that Republicans have is how do we play this? The Democrats are insistent to throw this in the Senate, and that's where it's going to go. Lindsey Graham has told me that he's very happy that this comes because he has a lot of things that want to be resolved for exactly the point that you said. We can do a real investigation to find out what happened. Adam Schiff is going to be a star witness about how he did all those backroom deals to get this impeachment started in the first place. But then you've got a lot of other Republican senators that say, let's just make it go away quickly. Let's just shut this down and move on because Trump can win without all of this. But a lot of Republicans think, well, let's drag this out throughout the Democratic primary. That was going to pin down all of those senators, Democrat senators that are running for president. They can't get out elected to do their campaigns right now because they're pinned down at the Senate. And also, they're going to have to answer a lot of questions about how all this got started in the first place, especially Joe Biden, whose son works for that very corrupt agency that all the gas company that went forward. And why did Joe Biden himself brag that he stopped aid from happening until he got a Ukrainian prosecutor fired? Those are questions that are going to be asked during the campaign, and that investigation is going to come through. And that's something that's what Republicans are debating.
It was
right
U.S. policy. It was the European policy to get rid of that corrupt prosecutor.
Biden wasn't freelancing. He was implementing U.S. policy as decided by the president.
And the United States has an agreement, a treaty that Bill Clinton signed and the Senate ratified in 2000 that authorizes the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine to ask each other questions and investigate about any corrupt citizen on either side.
Through normal official diplomatic channels, not on the phone.
That's not what the treaty says.
I have not reread everything, but usually it's through diplomatic channels.
The president has the right to do so.
But let's revisit this. And the scenario that was spelled out just at the end of part one by Jeffrey Hawkins is the one everyone around this table expects. Impeachment by the House of Representatives and the Senate, because you need that 2/3 majority to clear Donald Trump, and it will eventually be decided at the ballot box. You're saying, Mark Porter, and this is true, is will the losing side, be it whoever the Democratic nominee is or Donald Trump, accept the verdict in November of 2020?
That's a good question. We're afraid of Democrats not accepting the election results. Look what they've done so far.
And the Democrats on their side, of course.
Yes, because we've been talking about that all day, so I'm giving our side.
We heard Donald Trump claim that the ballot had been rigged in 2016, that yes, in fact, he did win the popular vote, even though he lost by...
He didn't win the popular vote because that wasn't the game we were playing.
But he claimed that he had.
Yes, on several occasions.
He said that he claimed that the people voted for him. The idea here, first of all, is that the popular vote was not the game that Kellyanne Conway had strategized. Brad Parscale is not focused on the popular vote at this point because we have the Electoral College. What we're more interested in is winning the election according to the constitutional that's the Constitution that has set up the rules.
The president said that 3 million illegal immigrants had voted for Hillary Clinton, and that's the reason why he did not win the popular vote.
Yeah.
Well, ballot harvesting is a serious problem, and if the United Nations was monitoring that elections, especially in California, ballot harvesting is a serious problem that we have to address.
May I ask you a question, actually? You say you're worried that the Democrats might not accept. Could you accept the premise that at least some Democrats, and I count myself among them, I'm not a Democratic operative, but I vote Democratic, are acting in good faith, and that they believe the intelligence community when it says that the Russians actively intervened in the 2016 election, that they could have legitimate concerns about a situation in which the president appears, in the view of people like me, to have asked a foreign country to conduct a politically motivated. Could you see a way? Is there any possible way that Democrats could possibly pose these questions and be acting in good faith, or is it all just fake news and just some plot by Shifty Shift and Sleepy Joe and all the rest?
Most Democrats are great people. And a lot of Democrats have voted for Trump, especially in swing states. We are targeting white collar, we're targeting blue collar, we're targeting the African American community and the Latino community. Democrats are certainly welcome to vote for us. Absolutely.
Dick Howard,
that's not the question I ask you, but okay.
All right, Dick Howard, let me ask you because
listen to my answer.
Because to explain it for a world audience, because I know you do it so well when I hear you on French TV and radio, explaining the United States. There is this sort of sacrosanctity, if you will, of the U.S. Constitution as it was written in the 18th century. Mm-hmm. Here, we live in a country, our Constitution dates back to 1958.
Yep.
And the question is, going forward, is that always going to be the case, that there's going to be this divine belief in that Constitution, the way it's written, in particular, this issue of, well, the popular vote doesn't decide the winner. It's actually done in this quirky system by where it's state electoral colleges.
You know that in order to change that quirky system, you have to go through an amendment process in which the states, particularly the small states, have a blocking majority. So the Constitution, I take as a given. There can be interpretations by the courts, of course, that can bend it. We can have Breyer's living constitution, that sort of thing. No, I think that if you want to put this in the context of comparing constitutions, the American and the French, let's go back to the 18th century. And we have, in the American case, you have 13 colonies who are struggling to get free from Great Britain. They declare their independence. They fight a revolutionary war. They become independent, and they start fighting with each other again. The Articles of Confederation. And finally, then, a cabal, as my friend here would say, a cabal gets together and formulates this Constitution and get it ratified popularly. But the goal in this case is for the American Constitution to preserve, to be the framework that preserves the democracy, the civil society, the life of these independent colonies. In France, to take the other option, and it's the option, by the way, that the socialists would take as well, the French option is we take over the state, we use the state to transform society, and then there's no longer a difference between state and society. And I think that many of our fellow Americans think, particularly on the left, think in terms of the French model. They don't understand that what we have is not a democratic republic. That's socialism. What we have is a republican democracy. Mm-hmm. The framework, the Constitution, preserves that democracy. And what's scary, in my reading of the last 50, 60 years of American history that I've been involved in from the civil rights movement forward, is that vision of a Constitution preserving a democracy, not making it better, not making it real democracy, really existing socialism. That vision of American democracy, the primacy of democracy, is, it seems to me, being lost in our picayune quarrels between Republicans and Democrats. Whether you're right about what the Republicans intended to do with, let's say, the Electoral College, whether you're right, those are, it seems to be, secondary issues. as compared with what's at issue here is the fate of democracy, of American democracy.
And what impact will that have for those watching on this side of the Atlantic? We have a general election in 8 days' time in the UK. What are people thinking when you sit here in Paris from this vantage point, you look at what's going on in the United States? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I stick with what this distinction that I've just made between a Republican democracy and a democratic republic. I think that there's a confusion. I think the idea of a referendum where somehow the people speaks, as if there were a people, one and united, as if there weren't a place for debate, dispute, disagreement, and finally, some sort of compromise.
I would just say, you know, as an American diplomat, when I started in the Foreign Service, when I became an ambassador regularly, I was asked to swear an oath. And that oath was to protect and to defend the Constitution. And that's uniquely American, right? We're not protecting and defending the American Republic, or we're protecting our constitutional way of life. And in those impeachment hearings, those officials from the White House, from the State Department, from the Defense Department, those officials, I believe, were sincere in their desire to protect and defend the Constitution from an executive branch that they were actually part of, that they felt had destroyed the balance that you're talking about. And that's what was concerning.
And that brings us back to the initial question. Do citizens care in the United States?
There's
Well, of
still
course they care.
a strong attachment to the Constitution. We can remember at some point the Democrats were unhappy with the Constitution because of the Electoral College, because this or that. And then when President Trump was elected, they realized that the Constitution allows, in fact, is built on checks and balances. And they realized that after all, the Constitution is good. It's a good thing. So I think there are lots of people that are happy to defend the Constitution.
Of course they are, and nothing to do with that, I think. It's the idea that, of course, the people are very interested in democracy. They're very interested that Washington works and that it works fairly for everyone. We've had the Mueller trial, and that was just really ridiculous, and people are fed up that here we go again. And the idea that most Americans, in our internal polling, feel that Democrats cannot win the next election, that they feel that they should have won the last election, and they'll do anything, including burn the Constitution and the Capitol down, in order to do it. We saw a protest in Washington the day after the inauguration. We had the Women's March on Donald Trump the day after. I mean, they could have waited a week. So the disrespect started, as far as we're concerned, on the other side. So you see how these sorts of things go back and forth. Right. So it's not all our fault, as CNN would have us to believe, and many times.
Nor is it the fault of the other side.
Or is it the fault of the other side?
Let me go back to this Constitution issue, because something I tried to explain to some French friends today is in 1954, when I was in elementary school, we used to have to recite the Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, every day at the beginning of class. And then in 1954, there was a change in the Pledge of Allegiance, and we added, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. And then came the clause, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. I was going to say, what the hell? But
it's French TV. You can go ahead.
Let's be polite. What in heaven's name happened? And of course, you know what happened. It was McCarthyism, or 1954. So that in this case, there's a tendency to make the Constitution much more flexible. Why? Because we speak for the people. The left and the right speak for the people. But in a democracy, there is no such thing as a united people. Mm-hmm. Remember the motto of the Americans, e pluribus unum, right? Out of many, one. But they don't become God. They don't become fixed, right? There is that plurality. And if we destroy the plurality, then what happens to the democracy?
I'm afraid if it's not destroyed, we're really close.
Well, look, we've been in worse situations before. The Civil War was certainly much worse than we are today. With Teddy Roosevelt, when he got shot in the chest by his political opposition, that was much worse than today. On that baseball field where the Democrat went and shot up those Republicans congressmen, that was worse than we are today. So we can say that if Trump does win, and that the Democrats can accept this, that would certainly make Republicans feel more comfortable. We can move on from all of these scandals and things and get something done for the people. The African-American vote for Trump is higher than it's been for any Republican president since Reagan. The idea that we are targeting African-Americans and Latinos in order to be one country. We don't believe that there should be these demographic segregations that Democrats love to say in order so they can win elections. We want one people. Everybody is American. That is fundamental in our Republican
Dick Howard,
platform.
for a final word, can you give us a little bit of optimism heading into the campaign?
I thought that was optimistic there, Francois.
No, but in terms of because after what Jeffrey Hawkins said, will it be more and more acrimony up until November of 2020?
I don't know. I think that this Supreme Court issue is going to be fundamental.
The acid
but
test.
I'm certainly look. One thing that you said that really set me off is you said we want to get something done for the people. No, damn it. I want a situation where the people can do something for themselves.
That's right.
And that's what
That's
this
right.
Republican democracy is supposed to be all about.
We'll leave it there for now. Dick Howard, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Mark Porter, Jeffrey Hawkins, and Dezine. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.
That's a very good point.
And we say hello to James Creedon. James,
Francois.
so there's the storm in Washington. All the while, always calm in Watford, right, at that NATO summit.
Right, so a lot of buzz coming out of that today, in particular about one, we saw first of all the spat between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump over NATO being brain dead or not brain dead. Lots of discussion about that and the fact that Donald Trump referred to the French president as very, very nasty. So all of that was sort of put out in the open, that sort of tension over the direction of NATO, which led some to wonder whether Emmanuel Macron had not used reverse psychology on Donald Trump. In other words, sort of stating that NATO was in such a bad state that Donald Trump would sort of weigh in behind and sort of speak in very strong terms. And there was all of that sort of playing out in the last 24, 48 hours. And then, of course, there was the cancelled press conference, partly because there was that long, rambling 40-minute press conference at the very start of the NATO summit, which wasn't scheduled. And so Jim Acosta here of CNN, not the best friend of Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say. They've had their tough moments in the past. He empty-chaired or empty-staged the US president for not turning up for that particular press conference. But the big buzz of the day, even the Jakarta Post, media all over the world are talking about this, was Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Boris Johnson and Princess Anne appearing to mock Donald Trump. Now, this was a video apparently that came
Everyone
from
forgets Mark Rutte. There's the Dutch Prime Minister.
Oh, this is true. Well, he had his back to us.
Okay.
And Trudeau was making all of the sort of testy statements. In any case, it was filmed by the pool at Buckingham Palace, then streamed by Sputnik, Russian media, which led a lot of people to wonder had they filmed it. But of course, they wouldn't have access to this sort of a cocktail party at Buckingham Palace. But it set everybody, tongues wagging and everybody talking about that. Donald Trump then hit back at Justin Trudeau, calling him two-faced over comments that his staff, Donald Trump's staff, their jaws were dropping about the 40-minute press conference and whatnot. But I think it's fair to say that what was said at press conferences was actually far more forceful, far more nasty in some respects than this open mic moment picked up by the pool at Buckingham Palace. So I think it's kind of interesting to note that political communications has become so unorthodox and so...
Yeah, we seize upon the open mic, but the acrimony
nothing
was much stronger.
Exactly. Nothing was said in this open mic moment.
Press conferences, for sure.
So it's certainly been dominating a lot of space on news websites for not maybe much justified reason.
All right. James Creedon, many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.